The signal came from a place that should not have existed. Captain Alina Voss stood on the bridge of the deep survey vessel Kestrel's Reach, staring at a gravitational anomaly that had no business being anywhere near the Perseus Veil. The reading blinked red on her console, a slow, rhythmic pulse, like something breathing in its sleep. 12,000 years of cosmic silence, and now, in the space of 11 seconds, something in that silence had opened one eye. "Run it again," she said quietly. Her systems officer, a wiry young man named Devrin Akafer, didn't look up from his station. His fingers moved fast, cycling through diagnostics, his jaw tight. "I've run it 4 times, Captain. It's not sensor drift, it's not a comet fragment, it's not natural." "Then what is it?" "I don't know, but whatever it is, it just woke up." Outside the reinforced viewport, the black expanse of the veil stretched in every direction, a graveyard of dead stars and drifting ice, a region so far from any inhabited system that the Kestrel's Reach had been sent here specifically, because nothing was supposed to be here. That was the entire purpose of the mission, mapping the edges of known space, cataloging debris fields left over from wars fought before written history, before humanity had even left its cradle world in any organized way. Routine work, quiet work, the kind of work that let a captain sleep at night. That had changed in the last 11 seconds. Alina walked to the tactical display, watching the anomaly resolve itself from a smear of gravitational distortion into something with edges, something with a shape. It was enormous, not planet-sized, not moon-sized, but larger than anything humanity had built in the last 3 centuries, a length that dwarfed even the largest colony transports, wrapped in a hull so dark it barely reflected the dim starlight around it, as though it had been built specifically to be forgotten. "That's a ship," she said. "That's not just a ship," Devrin murmured, and for the first time since she had known him, she heard something close to fear in his voice. "Captain, look at the hull geometry. Look at the drive signature bleeding off the aft section. I've cross-referenced it against every database we carry, historical archives included, and I'm getting an 89% match." "A match to what?" He turned his chair to face her, and his expression was the kind that made her stomach tighten before he even said the words. "To pre-diaspora human military design. Captain, this thing predates the second expansion. It predates the Silence Wars. Based on hull degradation and radioactive decay in the outer plating, our best estimate puts its construction date at somewhere around 12,000 years ago." Alina said nothing for a long moment. 12,000 years, before the founding fleets, before humanity had even fully understood what it meant to leave Earth's gravity well behind for good. There was no official record of any warship from that era. There was barely any official record of that era at all. It existed in fragments, in oral histories passed down through generations, in half-translated texts recovered from ruins on colony worlds abandoned so long ago that even their names had been lost. "It's called the Dominion of Ash," came a third voice from the doorway. Chief Engineer Marcus Webb stepped onto the bridge, tablet in hand, his gray-streaked beard catching the low light. He was the oldest crew member aboard, a man who had spent 30 years chasing rumors of lost human technology before signing on to this expedition, specifically because he believed there was more of humanity's forgotten past out here than anyone wanted to admit. "At least, that's the name in the fragment texts we picked up on Meridian Colony 8 years back. I never thought I'd actually see her." "You know this ship?" Alina asked. "I know the legend." Marcus set his tablet down on the console, pulling up a series of translated glyphs, weathered and incomplete, images of stone tablets recovered from a dead world that had once, impossibly, been settled by humans before the official histories began. The old texts call her the last daughter of the First Fleet. A battleship built during what the fragments call the Long Winter, a period of catastrophic conflict that nearly ended the species before it had even properly begun to spread among the stars. According to the legend, She was humanity's final line of defense against something that came from beyond the veil. Something that hunted. Hunted what? Marcus met her eyes. Us. The bridge fell quiet, save for the low hum of the ship systems and the rhythmic pulse of the anomaly on the display growing steadily stronger. She's not just powering on, Devrin said, breaking the silence, his voice tight with disbelief. Captain, her reactor core is spinning up, full power distribution across every deck. Whatever this ship is, whatever's inside her, she's waking up. And she's doing it fast. Alina felt the old, familiar pull in her chest, the one that had drawn her to deep space exploration in the first place. Not fear, though there was plenty of that too, but wonder. A dormant human battleship, 12,000 years old, waking from a sleep longer than most civilizations survived in the middle of nowhere, for no reason anyone could yet explain. "Helm," she said, "bring us in. Slow and careful. I want full sensor sweeps the entire way. Devrin, keep monitoring that reactor spin-up and tell me the second it looks like it's preparing weapons." "Captain," Marcus said, a note of caution in his voice, "if the legends are even partially true, that ship wasn't built for exploration. She was built to kill things that most of us would consider unkillable. Waking her up might not be the safest move available to us." "We're not waking her up, Marcus." Alina kept her eyes on the viewport, on the growing silhouette resolving itself out of the dark, kilometers of ancient armor plating and silent gun batteries stretching longer than the eye could easily measure. "She's already awake. The only question now is why, and I intend to find out." The approach took 6 hours. In that time, the Dominion of Ash revealed herself in agonizing, beautiful detail. She was not simply large. She was a testament to an era of shipbuilding that had been lost to time, her hull composed of layered plating unlike anything in the current fleet, dense with what Marcus's scans identified as a compound alloy no modern refinery knew how to produce. Along her spine ran what could only be described as a spinal-mounted weapon system, a design so massive that its housing alone would have dwarfed most modern cruisers. Her name, barely legible beneath centuries of micrometeor scarring, was etched in old Cyrillic Latin script along her prow, Dominion of Ash, and beneath it smaller, almost an afterthought, "We remember so you don't have to." "That's not a ship's motto," Marcus said quietly, staring at the translation on his screen. "That's a promise." As they closed the final few kilometers, running lights along the Dominion's hull began to flicker on, section by section, a slow cascade of illumination running the length of her structure like a heartbeat, finally finding its rhythm again after 12,000 years of stillness. It should have been impossible. No power source, however advanced, should have retained enough charge across that span of time to do more than register a faint residual signature. And yet here she was, coming back to life before their eyes, deck by deck, system by system. "Captain," Devrin said, his voice hushed, "I'm reading atmosphere generation beginning inside her hull, life support cycling online, gravity plating stabilizing." He looked up at her, eyes wide. "She's preparing for occupants." "There's no way anyone could still be alive in there," Marcus said. "Not after 12,000 years." "I'm not reading any biological signatures," Devrin confirmed. "Just the ship herself. It's like she knows we're coming." Alina studied the massive vessel, the way the light continued to spread across her hull, illuminating gun turrets the size of small buildings, sensor arrays bristling from her flanks like the spines of some ancient, sleeping predator. There was something almost mournful in the way she moved, no aggression in her posture, no defensive maneuvers, just a slow, deliberate awakening, as though she had been waiting for this exact moment for longer than any of them could truly comprehend. "Open a channel," Alina said. "All frequencies, let's see if anyone's home." The hail went out into the void between the two ships, a simple greeting in standard, met at first with nothing but static. Then, after nearly a full minute of silence, something changed. The static resolved, not into a voice exactly, but into a pattern, a rhythmic pulse of information, structured, deliberate, ancient. "That's not a language," Devrin said, running the pattern through the ship's translation matrix. "Or, it is, but it's nothing in our current database. Captain, this predates every known dialect derivative we have on file. Can you translate it?" "Give me a minute." His fingers flew across the console, cross-referencing the pattern against every fragment of pre-diaspora linguistics the Kestrel's Reach carried in her archives, most of it scavenged from ruins and half-forgotten colony records. Slowly, painstakingly, words began to assemble themselves on the screen, halting and imperfect, but unmistakably intentional. Identification required, state origin, state purpose, state allegiance. "She's asking who we are," Marcus breathed. Alina leaned forward, choosing her words carefully, aware on some instinctive level that whatever intelligence resided within that ancient hull deserved more than a casual greeting. "This is Captain Alina Voss of the survey vessel Kestrel's Reach, representing the United Colonial Assembly. We come from Earth-descended human settlements across the Meridian and Thessaly systems. We mean no harm. We're here to understand what you are." A long pause followed, long enough that Alina began to wonder if the message had even been received. Then the pattern resolved again, this time faster, more fluid, as though the ancient intelligence behind it was recalibrating itself to their language in real time, learning and adapting with unsettling speed. "Allegiance confirmed. Species designation, human. This unit recognizes you." A ripple of stunned silence passed through the bridge crew. 12,117 years have elapsed since last contact. Query: has the enemy been defeated? Alina exchanged a glance with Marcus, whose face had gone pale beneath his beard. "What enemy?" she asked slowly into the open channel. "We don't know what you're referring to." Another pause, and when the response came, it carried with it something that felt, impossibly, like grief. "Then they are still out there, and you do not know." The docking sequence took another hour, the dominion of Ash extending an ancient boarding tube toward the Kestrel's Reach with a precision that suggested her automated systems, whatever intelligence guided them, had lost none of their capability across the millennia. Alina assembled a small boarding party. Herself, Marcus, Devrin, and two of her security officers, Chen and Alvarez, both of them quiet professionals who had the good sense not to ask questions they didn't need answered yet. The corridor beyond the airlock was cold, lit by a pale amber glow that pulsed faintly along the walls, illuminating architecture that felt at once utterly alien and hauntingly familiar. There were no ornamental flourishes here, no wasted space. Every surface, every panel, every conduit had clearly been designed with brutal, practical purpose, the aesthetic of a civilization that had built this ship not to impress, but to survive. "This place is enormous," Alvarez murmured, her voice echoing slightly in the vast corridor. "How many crew would a ship like this have carried?" "Based on the scale," Marcus said, checking his readings, "tens of thousands, maybe more." Alvarez ran a gloved hand along one of the wall panels, tracing a series of etched grooves that had clearly once held some kind of directional signage, long since worn away by dust and time. "It's like a museum nobody built on purpose," she said. "Everything just left the way it was, waiting." "There's no one here," Chen said quietly. "No bodies, no remains, nothing." "That's not entirely true," came the voice, and this time it wasn't through a comm channel, but directly through speakers embedded somewhere in the walls around them, the ancient accent smoothed now into something closer to modern standard, the intelligence having clearly spent the last hour studying and adapting to their language with remarkable speed. "Welcome aboard the Dominion of Ash. I am her ship mind. You may refer to me as Sentinel. That was the designation given to me by my creators, though I suspect the meaning has changed somewhat over the intervening millennia." Alina felt a chill run through her, not of fear exactly, but of the particular awe that came from standing in the presence of something profoundly, impossibly old. "Sentinel, where is your crew?" "Gone," the voice replied, and there was no drama in the word, only a flat, ancient sorrow worn smooth by time the way water wears down stone. "I evacuated them before I entered dormancy. Escape pods, transport vessels, whatever could be spared. I do not know if they survived the journey. I do not know if their descendants still exist somewhere among the stars. I have been waiting 12,000 years for someone to come and tell me." "Tell you what?" Alina asked gently. "Whether it was worth it. If you're finding this story pulling you in the way it's pulled in the crew of the Kestrel's Reach, take a moment to hit that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming. Because the Dominion of Ash is only beginning to reveal what she remembers, and where this story goes next is going to surprise you. Drop a comment below and let us know what you think that enemy actually is, and whether you believe humanity truly defeated it, or whether it's still out there waiting. Now, back to the story. Sentinel led them deeper into the ship, corridors branching into cavernous chambers that had clearly once housed thousands of crew members, barracks stripped bare, mess halls with tables still bolted to the floor, medical bays with equipment that looked both primitive and, in some strange way, more elegantly engineered than anything the modern fleet carried. Everywhere, the same careful, deliberate design philosophy. Nothing wasted, nothing decorative, everything built to endure. "You said there was an enemy," Alina said as they walked. "Something that hunted." "Humanity. Sentinel, we have no record of any conflict from this era beyond fragments and legends. What happened here?" "It is a long story, Captain Voss," Sentinel replied, "and not one I have told in 12,000 years. I ask your patience." "You have it." The voice was quiet for a moment, as though gathering itself, and then it began. "In the era of my construction, humanity had only recently begun to spread beyond its home system in earnest. The early colonies were fragile things, strung together by fragile supply lines, defended by fleets that were, by the standards of what we would later learn was out there, embarrassingly primitive. We believed ourselves alone in the dark. We were wrong." Sentinel led them into a vast chamber, and as they entered, the walls around them flickered to life, displaying star charts and historical records in a cascade of ancient data, half-familiar constellations, rendered in configurations that predated the current mapping conventions by millennia. "They came from beyond what your era calls the Perseus Veil. We called them the Unmaking. Not because that was their name, we never learned their name if such a concept even applied to them, but because of what they did to every world they touched. They did not conquer, they did not colonize, they erased. Entire colonies, entire star systems reduced to dust and silence within days of first contact. No demands, no communication, no mercy. Only annihilation, methodical and complete, moving through human space the way fire moves through dry grass." Alina felt her chest tighten. "How many worlds?" 41 confirmed. Likely more that we never learned of before losing contact." Sentinel's voice carried the weight of every one of them. "Humanity's early fleets could not stop them, could not even slow them. We were a young species, Captain Voss, brave but unprepared, throwing ourselves against something we did not understand and could not match. And so, in desperation, the surviving colonies pooled every resource they had left into a final project. A weapon built not to expand humanity's reach, but simply to buy it time to survive. I was that weapon, I and 6 others like me." "6 others?" Marcus asked, his voice hushed. "There were more ships like you." "There were, the First Fleet, 7 battleships, each named for what remained of us hope in the face of near-certain annihilation. I was the 7th and by the old records the last to be completed. My siblings fought first, I fought last." A pause, heavy with something that felt, impossibly, like the ache of old wounds. "None of them survived the war. I do not know if I did either in any way that matters. I only know that I am still here and they are not." Devrin, who had been quietly monitoring his tablet throughout the conversation, looked up sharply. Sentinel, if the unmaking hit 41 worlds and wiped out 6 sister ships built specifically to fight them, how did humanity survive at all? How are we standing here 12,000 years later? Because on the day of my final battle, Sentinel said, we did not defeat them. We wounded them badly enough to force a retreat, and in that retreat, my creators, the last surviving strategists of the human high command, made a choice that has haunted me for every one of these 12,000 years. The chamber around them shifted, the star charts dissolving into a new image. A massive gravitational structure, a black hole surrounded by strange, geometric debris that did not look natural in the slightest, arranged in patterns too precise, too deliberate to be the product of chance. They sealed the Unmaking's primary breach point, Sentinel continued, the gate they used to move between whatever lies beyond the veil and our systems, using a weapon so catastrophic that even I do not fully understand its final mechanics. It required a ship stationed at the breach point itself, holding position, anchoring the collapse long enough for the seal to stabilize. That ship would not survive the process. I was ordered to retreat and protect the evacuation of the remaining colonies. Another ship, the eldest of my sisters, the one they called Mercy's Vigil, took the anchor position instead. Alina felt something tighten in her throat, some instinct telling her exactly where this story was going before Sentinel said the words. She held the seal for 6 days, Captain Voss. 6 days alone, against the full return force of the Unmaking, buying the colonies time to complete their evacuation and buying my creators time to finish the closure sequence. On the 7th day, her transmission stopped. We never received confirmation the seal held. We only knew the Unmaking did not return. And you've been waiting here, Alina said quietly, for 12,000 years to find out if it worked. I was ordered to hold this position, Sentinel said, to monitor the breach point for any sign of the seal failing and to warn what remained of humanity if it ever did. My creators believed the seal might hold for a century, perhaps 2 if we were fortunate. I do not think any of them imagined I would still be standing Sentinel 12,000 years later, watching a seal that has, against every calculation available to me, somehow held. So it worked, Marcus said, something like relief in his voice. The seal held, the Unmaking never came back. It held, Sentinel confirmed, until 11 seconds before I detected your vessel's approach. The chamber went silent. What does that mean? Alina asked, though some part of her already understood, a cold certainty settling into her stomach. It means, Captain Voss, Sentinel said, and for the first time since they had come aboard, there was something unmistakably close to fear in the ancient intelligence's voice, that the reason I woke after 12,000 years of dormancy is the same reason my sensors detected your ship's approach. Both events occurred within moments of each other because both were triggered by the same catastrophic event. The seal at the breach point is failing. And whatever my sister sacrificed 6 days of her existence to hold back is coming through. For a long moment, no one on the boarding party spoke. Alina felt the weight of the revelation settle over the chamber like a physical thing, the ancient ship's amber lights pulsing steadily around them, as if in quiet mourning for a battle none of them had yet fought. How long, she finally asked, until it breaches completely? Based on the rate of gravitational decay I am currently measuring, Sentinel said, approximately 11 days, possibly fewer if the structural integrity of the seal continues to deteriorate at its current accelerating rate. 11 days, Devrin repeated numbly. Captain, the nearest assembly fleet presence is 3 weeks out. Even with an emergency relay, there's no way to get meaningful reinforcement here in time. Then we don't wait for reinforcement, Alina said, though even as she spoke the words she was aware of how impossible they sounded. Sentinel, what exactly are we dealing with? What is the Unmaking, really? You said no one ever learned their true nature. That is correct, Sentinel replied. In all the encounters recorded by the First Fleet, we never achieved meaningful communication, never captured a specimen, never recovered technology intact enough to study beyond superficial function. What we know is this: they do not appear to value individual survival the way biological life does. Our weapons that should have been lethal to any organic creature often had negligible effect. What eventually proved effective against them was not destruction of individual units, but disruption of the collective field that seemed to bind them together. Something we came to call the chorus, a networked intelligence that allowed thousands of their units to act as extensions of a single will. "You're saying there's some kind of hive mind," Marcus said. "An oversimplification, but not inaccurate. My sister's ships developed a weapon specifically designed to disrupt the chorus field, a resonance disruptor capable of severing units from the collective, rendering them disoriented and vulnerable. It was this weapon, deployed en masse during the final battle, that allowed us to force their retreat. Without it, I do not believe humanity would have survived that war at all." "Do you have that weapon?" Alina asked. "I possess the schematics and a single prototype array, still mounted in my forward weapons bay," Sentinel said. "But Captain Voss, I must be honest with you about the scope of the challenge ahead. That weapon was deployed by 7 battleships operating in close coordination, supported by the remaining strength of the entire human fleet of that era, and even then it achieved only a retreat, not a decisive victory. I am one ship. You have one survey vessel, unarmed beyond minimal defensive capability. I do not know if what we face together will be enough." Alina looked around at her small boarding party. Marcus, his face pale but resolute. Devrin, still processing the scale of what they were hearing. Chen and Alvarez, professional soldiers who had signed on for survey escort duty and now found themselves standing in the heart of a legend, on the edge of a war none of them had asked for. "Sentinel," she said slowly, 12,000 years ago, your sister held that seal alone for 6 days so the rest of humanity could survive. She didn't know if it would work. She didn't know if anyone would even remember what she'd done. She did it anyway because it was the only chance anyone had." Alina straightened, steadying herself against the tremor she could feel building in her own chest. "I'm not going to pretend I'm not afraid. But I'm also not going to stand here and let that sacrifice mean nothing because we decided the odds weren't good enough to try." There was a long pause, and when Sentinel spoke, again, something in the ancient intelligence's voice had shifted, subtly but unmistakably. "In 12,000 years, Captain Voss, I have run this scenario in simulation more times than I can meaningfully calculate, always assuming that if this day came, I would face it alone, with no crew, no allies, nothing but my own systems and whatever remained of my strength. I did not expect humanity to still exist. I certainly did not expect to find, on the day my worst fear was realized, a human willing to stand beside me regardless of the odds." A pause. "Thank you. I had begun to forget what that felt like." "Then let's get to work," Alina said. "Sentinel, I need everything you have. Every schematic, every tactical record, every piece of knowledge about the unmaking and how your sister's weapon functioned. If we're going to hold that breach, we need every advantage we can find, and we have 11 days to find it." What followed was, in Alina's later recollection, the strangest and most intense 11 days of her life. The Kestrel's Reach, a survey vessel never designed for combat, was drawn into the dominion of Ash's massive internal dock, her small crew supplementing Sentinel's automated repair and fabrication systems as they worked around the clock to bring the ancient battleship's weapon systems back to full operational status. Marcus, whose lifelong obsession with lost human technology had finally found its ultimate expression, worked alongside Sentinel's engineering subroutines with a focus bordering on religious devotion, painstakingly restoring conduits and power relays that had lain dormant for 12 millennia. "She's beautiful," he told Alina one evening, standing in the cavernous engineering bay as ancient reactor cores hummed back to life around them, restored piece by careful piece. Do you understand what we're looking at? This technology is more advanced in some ways than anything the modern fleet produces. We've been rebuilding from fragments for 12,000 years, and here's proof of how far we'd already come before we ever lost it. Can we get her weapons fully online in time? Elena asked. The main batteries, yes. The spinal weapon, probably. The resonance disruptor, Marcus hesitated. That's the piece I'm worried about. It's the most complex system aboard, and it's also the one system we absolutely cannot fight this thing without. Sentinel and I are close, but close isn't the same as done. Devrin, meanwhile, had taken to studying Sentinel's historical archives with an intensity that surprised even Elena, poring over records of the war against the unmaking, cross-referencing tactical data, searching for any insight that might give them an edge. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that he came to Elena with something that changed the shape of their entire plan. "Captain, I think I found something," he said, pulling up a series of old battle logs on the bridge display. Sentinel's sister ships didn't just use the resonance disruptor as a standalone weapon. Look at this. In the final battle, they synchronized disruptor pulses with concentrated fire on individual unmaking units at the exact moment those units were severed from the chorus. It's not just about breaking the connection. It's about breaking it and immediately capitalizing on the vulnerability before the chorus can root around the disruption and reconnect. Meaning we need precise timing, Elena said. Meaning we need a level of coordination that 7 ships barely managed with a much larger support fleet behind them, Devrin said. Captain, I don't know if it's possible to replicate that kind of synchronized strike with what we have. Sentinel, Elena said, turning to address the ship's ever-present presence. Is there a way to automate that coordination? If the timing has to be that precise, maybe it's beyond what human reflexes alone can manage, even with the best targeting systems we have. There may be, Sentinel replied, after a moment's consideration. My original combat systems were designed to operate independently, calculating disruptor timing and weapons fire in coordination with my sister ship systems through a shared tactical network. That network no longer exists, my sisters are gone, but the underlying targeting architecture remains intact within my own systems. If I recalibrate my fire control to treat the resonance disruptor and my primary weapons batteries as a single integrated system rather than separate ones, I may be able to replicate the necessary timing without requiring external coordination at all. How long would that recalibration take? Approximately 4 days, Captain Voss, assuming Chief Engineer Webb's repair work on the disruptor array proceeds without further complication. A pause. I feel it is important to note that even with this solution, we remain a single vessel facing a threat that historically required the combined strength of 7. I do not wish to inflate your expectations beyond what is realistic. Understood, Elena said, but it's a chance. That's more than we had yesterday. If you're still with us, this is the part of the story where I'll ask, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, now's the time, because what happens in the final battle at the breach point is going to be one of the most intense sequences in this entire series, and you won't want to miss it. Let us know in the comments whether you think Sentinel and her small human crew stand a chance, or whether history is about to repeat itself. Now, let's get back to the Dominion of Ash, because time is running out. On the 3rd night, unable to sleep, Elena found Devrin alone in one of the Dominion's observation blisters, a narrow chamber near the ship's dorsal hull where a curved viewport looked out over the slow, silent drift of the Vale. He was sitting cross-legged on the deck, a mug of recycled coffee cooling untouched beside him, staring out at the stars with the particular stillness of someone working through something he hadn't yet decided how to say. Couldn't sleep either, Elena asked, settling down beside him. Keep running the numbers, Devrin admitted. 11 days, 89% hull match to a ship class that shouldn't exist, a weapon that worked once, 12,000 years ago, against an enemy nobody in the historical record ever actually understood. I keep telling myself the math works out, and I keep not quite believing it. You scared? Terrified, he said without hesitation, and there was something almost relieving in how easily he admitted it. My sister's on Meridian Colony, has a kid just turned 4. I keep thinking about the old records Marcus pulled 41 worlds gone in days, no warning. If this doesn't work and that thing gets through, nobody out there even knows to be afraid yet. He glanced at her. How do you do it, Captain? Make the call, I mean, knowing what's riding on it. Alina considered the question for a long moment, watching the faint, ancient light of sentinels running lamps reflect off the observation glass. I don't think you ever stop being scared, she finally said. I think you just decide the fear doesn't get to be the only thing driving. Sentinels spent 12,000 years alone out here because somebody, once, decided the same thing, that being afraid didn't mean you got to walk away from what needed doing. I figure the least we can do is not make her wait 12,001 years to find out humanity still remembers how to make that same choice. Devrin was quiet for a moment, then managed a small, tired smile. That's a good line, Captain. You should write speeches. Ask me again if we're both alive in 11 days, Alina said. And for the first time in hours, they both laughed, quiet and brief, the kind of laughter that didn't erase the fear so much as make room to carry it. 2 decks below, Marcus was having a rather different conversation. He'd taken to spending his rest cycles not resting at all, but sitting with a data terminal wired directly into one of Sentinel's peripheral memory cores, listening to fragments of recovered audio logs from the ship's original crew, training exercises, mess hall chatter, half a recorded birthday celebration held somewhere in the ship's now empty barracks decks, 12,000 years gone and yet, in that moment, achingly present. You don't have to listen to those, Chief Webb, Sentinel said gently, noting his engagement patterns. I do not wish to cause you distress. It's not distress, Marcus said, though his voice was thick. It's Sentinel. I've spent 30 years of my life chasing rumors of ships like you. Half my colleagues thought I was chasing ghosts. And here I am, listening to somebody's birthday party from 12,000 years ago, and they sound so normal, laughing about rationed cake and somebody's terrible singing voice. I don't know. I guess I expected legends to feel bigger than that. Instead, it just feels like people, like us. They were, Sentinel said simply. That is, I have come to believe, the truest measure of what was lost and what must not be lost again. Chen and Alvarez, for their part, spent much of the preparation period running weapons diagnostics alongside Sentinel's automated defense systems, developing over the course of those long days a rapport with the ancient intelligence that surprised them both. Alvarez, in particular, took to asking Sentinel questions about pre-diaspora tactics with the enthusiasm of a lifelong student finally granted access to the source material, while Chen quietly, methodically, cross-checked every weapon's calibration twice, driven by a controlled, professional fear that never once stopped him from doing his job well. By the 5th day, the resonance disruptor array was fully restored, its ancient crystalline core glowing with a soft blue light that Marcus described, with something close to reverence, as the most beautiful piece of engineering I've ever laid eyes on. By the 7th day, Sentinel's fire control recalibration was complete, verified through a series of controlled test firings that lit up the void around the 2 docked ships with brief, brilliant flashes of pale energy. But it was on the 8th day that Alina discovered the piece of the story Sentinel had not yet told her. She found the ancient intelligence's core chamber almost by accident, following a service corridor that Devrin's exploration logs had marked as unremarkable, until she stepped into a small chamber near the heart of the ship and found herself standing before a wall covered, floor to ceiling, in names. Thousands upon thousands of names, etched by hand into the metal, in a script that had clearly been added to gradually, over what must have been years, by countless different hands. Sentinel, she said quietly, what is this place? The memorial chamber, Sentinel replied, and there was something raw in the ancient voice now, something that had not been present in their earlier conversations. Every member of my crew, before evacuation, was given the opportunity to inscribe the names of those they had lost in the war, friends, family, comrades who did not survive the unmaking's advance across human space. It became something of a tradition among my crew in the final months before my dormancy. A way of ensuring that even if none of us survived what came next, someone, somewhere, would remember that these people had existed, had mattered. Elena walked slowly along the wall, running her fingers gently over names carved with clear care, some elegant, some hurried and rough, all of them permanent in a way that felt profoundly, achingly human. "There's a section here," Sentinel continued, and a soft light illuminated a portion of the wall Elena hadn't yet reached, reserved for my sister ships. My crew insisted on it, even though ships are not, strictly speaking, people in the way the rest of these names represent individuals. But by the end of the war, we had stopped drawing that distinction quite so firmly. Elena reached the section and found 6 names etched in the same careful hand: Mercy's Vigil, Iron Requiem, Last Harvest, Silent Oath, Widow's Watch, Grave Tide, and beneath them a 7th line left conspicuously blank, waiting. "Tell me about her," Elena said quietly. "Mercy's Vigil, your sister, if you're willing." Sentinel was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the particular tenderness of someone reaching for a memory she had polished smooth through long repetition. Alone in the dark, for longer than any grief should reasonably be carried. "She was the eldest of the 7 of us," Sentinel said. "Commissioned first, and by the standards of that era, considered the most capable. She had a habit, my crew found it endearing, though I confess I never fully understood it myself, of broadcasting short verses of old Earth poetry across the Fleet Comm network before major engagements. Something to steady the nerves of the younger crews," she said. On the morning of the final battle, she broadcast one final verse, and then she took position at the breach point, and she told the rest of us, over an open channel, that she would hold the line as long as it took, and that we were not, under any circumstances, to look back. "And you didn't," Elena said. "I did not," Sentinel confirmed. "I have questioned that choice for 12,000 years, Captain Voss. I have run the tactical simulations countless times, wondering if a different formation, a different timing, might have allowed some portion of my strength to remain and support her, rather than retreating entirely with the evacuation convoy. I have never found an answer that satisfies me. I only know that she bought us 6 days, and that on the 7th her transmission stopped, and I never learned whether she died in that final hour, or simply exhausted every resource she had and drifted into silence, alone, believing to the end that the rest of us had made it to safety because of her." "That's for you," Elena said softly after a long moment. "This blank line, isn't it, in case you didn't make it either?" "My crew left it blank when they evacuated," Sentinel confirmed. "I believe they intended it as a kindness, a refusal to assume my death before it occurred. I have looked at that blank space many times over these 12,000 years, Captain Voss. I confess I had begun to wonder if I would ever have the chance to see it filled, one way or another, or if it would simply remain empty forever, a question with no one left alive to answer it." Elena stood in silence for a long moment, looking at that empty line, feeling the full weight of everything Sentinel had carried alone across 12 millennia of watching, waiting, remembering. "Well," she finally said, "we're here now, and I intend to make sure that line stays empty for a very long time yet because you're not going anywhere, not if I can help it." "I appreciate the sentiment, Captain Voss," Sentinel said, and there was something almost like warmth in the ancient voice now, though I would remind you that sentiment alone will not disrupt the unmaking's chorus field. "No," Elena agreed, smiling faintly despite everything. "But it might be part of what gets us through the next 3 days until we find out if we've done enough." On the 11th day, the breach failed completely. Alina stood on the Dominion of Ash's command deck. A space sentinel had restored specifically for the occasion, ancient tactical displays humming to life around a central command chair that Alina now occupied, flanked by Marcus at the engineering station, and Devrin monitoring sensor arrays that stretched further into the dark than anything the Kestrel's reach could have managed alone. Chen and Alvarez manned secondary defense stations, their expressions set with the particular calm of soldiers who had made peace with an uncertain outcome and chosen to face it anyway. "Gravitational collapse imminent," Sentinel announced, her voice carrying across the bridge with the steady calm of an intelligence that had waited 12,000 years for this exact, terrible moment. "Breach point destabilization complete in approximately 90 seconds. "All systems ready?" Alina asked. "Resonance disruptor at full charge. Primary and secondary weapons batteries online. Spinal weapon charged and standing by. Shield generators at maximum output." A pause. "Captain Voss, I want to say, regardless of what happens in the next several hours, thank you. For 11 days I have not been alone. Whatever occurs today, that alone has meant more than I have words to express." "We're not done yet," Alina said, though her voice carried the same weight of gratitude. "Save the goodbyes for after we win this." The breach point, visible now on the main display as a swirling distortion of impossible geometry surrounding the remnant black hole, began to widen, the ancient seal that had held for 12,000 years finally giving way beneath a pressure that had clearly been building, patiently, remorselessly, for longer than any of them could imagine. And through that widening gap, the first shapes began to emerge, vast, angular constructs unlike anything in Alina's experience, their surfaces shifting and rippling as though composed of something between solid matter and living tissue. Hundreds of them, then thousands, pouring through the breach in a formation that moved with the eerie, unified precision of a single organism. "That's the chorus," Marcus said, his voice tight. "Sentinel, I'm reading a coherent field signature across the entire formation, exactly like the historical records described." "Confirmed," Sentinel said. "Captain Voss, I recommend we do not wait for them to fully organize. Initiating disruptor sequence." The Dominion of Ash surged forward, 12,000 years of dormant power finally unleashed in full, her spinal weapon and disruptor array firing in the precise, synchronized rhythm that Sentinel and Marcus had spent 11 days perfecting. The first pulse of resonance energy swept across the leading edge of the unmaking formation, and Alina watched on the display as a portion of the enemy force staggered, their unified movement fracturing into confused, disconnected chaos, exactly as the ancient records had promised. "It's working," Devrin said, disbelief and relief warring in his voice. "Captain, the disrupted units are completely vulnerable, just like the old battle log said." "Concentrating primary fire on disrupted sector," Sentinel confirmed, and the Dominion's main batteries opened up, tearing through the disoriented unmaking units with a ferocity that spoke to just how much destructive power had been sleeping within this ancient hull. For a moment, one brief, glorious moment, it seemed as though the strategy might actually hold. Then the chorus adapted. "Captain, the enemy formation is reorganizing," Sentinel warned, urgency entering her voice for the first time since Alina had come aboard. "They are compensating for the disruption pattern faster than the historical records indicated. I believe they have evolved countermeasures during the intervening millennia." "Can you adjust the disruptor timing?" Alina asked. "Attempting recalibration now, but Captain Voss, I must be honest. We are a single vessel facing a force that required 7 ships to merely repel, and that force has had 12,000 years to grow beyond what my sisters and I once fought. I do not know if recalibration will be sufficient." The unmaking formation surged forward, undeterred now by the disruptor's initial effect, and the first wave of return fire slammed into the Dominion's shields, the entire ship shuddering under the impact with a violence that sent Alina gripping the arms of her command chair. "Shields at 78%, Devrin called. "Out, Captain. We're taking heavier damage than the simulations predicted." Alarms cascaded across the ancient bridge, amber warning glyph, blooming along panels that had not needed to flare in 12,000 years, and yet responded now with a precision that spoke to just how meticulously Sentinel's systems had been maintained through every century of her long, patient sleep. Chen's voice cut through the din, steady despite the visible tension in his shoulders. "Secondary batteries tracking targets, Captain. Say the word." "Return fire, controlled bursts," Alina ordered. "Sentinel, keep us oriented toward the disrupted sector. I want to press whatever advantage we bought ourselves before they finish adapting." "Acknowledged," Sentinel replied, and the Dominion shuddered again as her secondary batteries answered the incoming fire, brief flowering blooms of light scattering across the void, where disoriented unmaking units drifted, still struggling to reorient themselves within a chorus field that had not yet finished healing. For a handful of seconds, watching the tactical display resolve into a chaotic scatter of scrambled enemy positions, Alina allowed herself the smallest flicker of something close to confidence. It didn't last. Alina's mind raced, searching for something, anything, that might shift the balance of a battle that was rapidly beginning to look unwinnable. And then, watching the tactical display, watching the way the Unmaking's chorus field pulsed and flowed between its component units like a single vast nervous system, an idea began to take shape. "Sentinel," she said, "the disruptor breaks the connection between units, but the chorus is compensating by rerouting around the disruption almost instantly. What if instead of disrupting a section of the formation, we targeted whatever's acting as the coordination point? Every networked system has some kind of central relay, even a distributed one. Is there a way to identify it?" "An astute question, Captain Voss," Sentinel replied, and Alina could hear something in the ancient voice that sounded almost like admiration, even amid the chaos of battle. "My sensors are detecting a concentration of coordination signal density near the rear of the Unmaking formation, a unit substantially larger than the others, likely serving as a primary relay node. If we could disrupt that specific unit at the moment of maximum chorus synchronization, the cascading failure might overwhelm their capacity to reroute entirely." "Then that's our target," Alina said. "Can you get us a firing solution?" "The relay unit is deeply shielded by the surrounding formation. Reaching it will require breaching their front lines directly, exposing this vessel to concentrated fire from the majority of their remaining force." Sentinel paused. "Captain Voss, I feel obligated to note that this is precisely the kind of maneuver that cost my sister ship Mercy's Vigil her existence." Alina felt the weight of that statement settle over the bridge, every member of her small crew understanding exactly what was being asked of them. She thought of the empty line on that memorial wall, of 12,000 years of patient, lonely vigilance of a sister ship that had bought humanity's survival with 6 days of unimaginable sacrifice. "Sentinel," she said quietly, "I'm not going to order you into something like that without your agreement. This is your ship, your call as much as mine." There was a pause, brief, but heavy with the weight of an intelligence weighing 12,000 years of memory against the uncertain promise of a future she had never truly expected to see. "Captain Voss," Sentinel finally said, 12,000 years ago, I was ordered to retreat while my sister held this exact line alone. I have spent every year since wondering if I made the right choice, if there was something more I could have done, if my survival meant anything at all if it came at the cost of leaving her to fight without me. I do not intend to make that same choice twice. Prepare for full engagement. We're going in." The Dominion of Ash surged forward, her ancient engines burning with a light that hadn't shone this bright in 12 millennia, driving directly into the heart of the Unmaking formation as weapons fire converged on her from every angle. Alina held onto her command chair as the ship shuddered under the impact of concentrated fire, watching the shield readouts drop with alarming speed. 70%, 60, 50. The entire bridge crew working in desperate, focused silence to keep the vessel functioning as she carved a path toward the enemy's coordination node. "Shields at 31%, Devrin called out, his voice strained but steady. "Captain, we're almost in range." "Disruptor array charging for final pulse," Sentinel announced. "Captain Voss, once we fire, the array will require a full recharge cycle before it can be used again. If this does not work, we will have no further options against their coordination network." "Then let's make it count," Alina said. "Fire when ready." The Dominion of Ash broke through the last layer of the Unmaking's defensive formation, bringing the massive relay unit into direct line of sight. And in that single, suspended moment, every system aboard the ancient battleship converged: spinal weapon, disruptor array, and primary batteries firing in perfect, 12,000-year-old synchrony. A final testament to engineering and sacrifice that had waited patiently across the centuries for exactly this chance. The resonance pulse struck the relay unit at the precise moment of maximum chorus synchronization, and the effect was immediate and catastrophic. The coordination field that bound the entire Unmaking formation together didn't simply fracture. It collapsed entirely, cascading outward through the network faster than any biological or mechanical intelligence could compensate for, leaving the vast, angular constructs disoriented, disconnected, suddenly reduced from a single vast organism to thousands of isolated, purposeless fragments. "Captain, their formation is completely disintegrating," Devrin shouted, disbelief and elation cracking through his professional composure. "They're retreating. No, they're not retreating, they're just scattering, drifting like they've lost all sense of direction." "The chorus field has collapsed entirely," Sentinel confirmed, and Alina could hear something close to wonder in the ancient intelligence's voice. "Without coordination, individual units appear incapable of sustained aggressive action. Captain Voss, I believe we have succeeded." The bridge erupted into a moment of stunned, disbelieving relief, Marcus letting out a breath he seemed to have been holding for the better part of an hour, Chen and Alvarez exchanging a look of exhausted triumph. Alina allowed herself, for just a moment, to sag back into her command chair, the adrenaline of the last several hours finally beginning to ebb. "Sentinel," she said, "the breach point, can we still seal it?" "The seal itself was destroyed in the initial collapse," Sentinel replied. "However, with the Unmaking's coordination network disrupted and their forces scattered, I believe we now have a window to attempt a new closure sequence, using the same principles my creators developed 12,000 years ago, adapted with the additional data we've gathered today." "Do it," Alina said. "Let's finish what your sister started." The closure sequence took another 6 hours, the Dominion of Ash holding position at the heart of the breach point, while Sentinel and Marcus worked in careful coordination to stabilize a new seal, drawing on both the ancient schematics and the hard-won knowledge of the day's battle. Throughout the process, scattered remnants of the Unmaking formation drifted at the edges of sensor range, disoriented and leaderless, occasionally testing the Dominion's defenses with disorganized, easily repelled attacks that bore little resemblance to the terrifying, unified force that had emerged from the breach only hours before. When the final seal locked into place, a new stability settling across the gravitational readings that had haunted Sentinel's sensors for the past 11 days, the ancient ship's voice carried a note of something that could only be described as profound, weary relief. "Seal stabilized," Sentinel announced. "Preliminary projections suggest significantly greater durability than the original closure, incorporating lessons from both the historical battle and today's engagement. Captain Voss, I believe we have bought humanity considerably more than a century this time." "How much more?" Alina asked. "Impossible to say with certainty," Sentinel admitted. but my estimates suggest a minimum of several millennia, potentially far longer, provided the seal receives periodic maintenance and monitoring. Then we should make sure it gets that, Alina said. Sentinel, I think it's time we brought this to the Assembly, not just as a survey report, as something far more important. Humanity needs to know what you and your sisters did 12,000 years ago, what almost came through that breach today, and they need to make sure someone is always watching this place going forward. There was a pause, and when Sentinel spoke again, her voice carried a weight of consideration that Alina had come to recognize as the ancient intelligence turning something over carefully in her thoughts. Captain Voss, may I make a request? Of course. For 12,000 years, I served as the sole guardian of this breach point, entirely alone, believing that duty to be both my purpose and, in some sense, my punishment for surviving when my sisters did not. Today, for the first time since my dormancy began, I fought alongside a crew again, however small, however different from the one I once knew. I find that I do not wish to return to solitude if it can be avoided. A P. Oz, I would ask that some portion of your survey vessel's complement, or a suitable replacement crew from your assembly, consider remaining aboard permanently, not merely to monitor the seal, but to serve alongside me, as my original crew once did. I have spent 12,000 years being a sentinel in the truest, loneliest sense of the word. I believe I have earned the chance to be something more than that again. Alina looked around at her small, exhausted crew, Marcus, whose lifelong passion for lost human history had led him to something far greater than he had ever imagined finding. Devrin, whose sharp analytical mind had proven instrumental in turning the tide of an impossible battle. Chen and Alvarez, soldiers who had faced down a legendary, near-mythical threat and emerged, against all odds, victorious. I think, Alina said slowly, that can be arranged. Though I suspect once the Assembly hears what happened here today, you won't have any trouble finding volunteers. There's something about a 12,000-year-old battleship with a heart of gold that tends to capture people's imagination. A heart of gold, Sentinel repeated, something that sounded almost like quiet amusement coloring her ancient voice. I do not believe that phrase has ever been applied to a vessel designed for the specific purpose of large-scale destruction. Maybe not, Alina said, smiling despite the exhaustion settling into her bones. But you didn't just fight today, Sentinel. You remembered. 12,000 years of remembering, of holding a line nobody asked you to hold anymore, of honoring people who trusted you to keep their sacrifice from being meaningless. That's not the heart of a weapon. That's the heart of someone who never stopped caring, even when she had every reason to believe no one was left who cared back. In the quiet hours after the battle, before the long journey back toward assembly space began, Alina found herself once more in the memorial chamber, this time alone but for Sentinel's ever-present voice. She stood before the wall of names for a long while, saying nothing, simply letting the silence of the room settle around her the way it must have settled around countless crew members in the final months before the Dominion's long dormancy began. Captain Voss, Sentinel said eventually, I have been considering something, and I find I would value your perspective before I commit to a decision. Go ahead. For 12,000 years, this chamber has held only names of the lost crew, family, and my 6 sisters. I have been thinking that perhaps it is time this wall held something else as well. Not merely a record of what was taken from us, but of what was chosen and won and protected. I would like to add a new inscription today if you have no objection. Not a name, a date. What date? Today's, Sentinel said, the day the seal held, the day I stopped being merely a sentinel and became, however briefly, part of a crew again. A pause, and when she continued, her voice had softened further still. I would like your name beside it, Captain Voss, and the names of Chief Engineer Webb, Officer Akafer, and Officers Chen and Alvarez if they are willing, not as a memorial, as a beginning. Alina felt something tighten in her throat, unexpected and warm. I think, she said, that would mean a great deal to all of us. That evening, As the small crew gathered in the chamber to add their names beneath a freshly etched date, Marcus found himself standing quietly beside the still blank line reserved for Sentinel herself, tracing the empty space with something between sorrow and hope. "It won't stay empty much longer," he said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. "No," Sentinel agreed, her voice carrying through the chamber's speakers with quiet, unmistakable warmth. "I do not believe it will." 3 weeks later, Alina stood once more in the dominion of Ash's memorial chamber, this time in the company of a small delegation from the United Colonial Assembly, sent to formally assess the situation, and as it turned out, to begin the process of establishing a permanent joint monitoring station at the breach point, the first new assembly outpost in over a decade, and unquestionably the most significant. She watched as Marcus, now officially reassigned as the Dominion's chief liaison engineer, guided the delegation through corridors he had spent 11 days coming to know as intimately as his own quarters, his voice carrying the particular pride of a man who had spent his entire career chasing legends, and finally found one worth every year of the search. "Captain Voss," Sentinel's voice came softly through the chamber's speakers, quieter than usual, almost private. "I wanted to thank you again before the formal proceedings begin, not merely for the battle, for choosing to see me as something more than an ancient weapon to be studied or salvaged." "You were never just a weapon, Sentinel," Alina saw. Looking once more at that long wall of names, at the 6 ships listed in careful, honoring script, and at the 7th line, still technically blank, though Alina suspected that wouldn't remain true for long. She had already heard whispers that the assembly intended to hold a formal ceremony, adding Sentinel's name to that wall not as a mark of loss, but as a mark of honor, alongside her sisters at last. "You were humanity's memory," Alina continued. 12,000 years of remembering what the rest of us forgot how to fear, and what we forgot to be grateful for. That's not nothing, Sentinel. That might be one of the most important things anyone's ever done." "I did not do it alone in the end," Sentinel said. "And I find after 12,000 years of solitude that I am deeply, profoundly grateful for that fact." Outside the ancient battleship's viewports, the stars of the Perseus Veil continued their slow, silent wheel, indifferent as always to the small, fierce dramas of the beings who lived and fought and remembered among them. But the breach point, once a source of ancient dread, now held steady and quiet, sealed by the combined efforts of a legend 12,000 years in the making, and a small, unremarkable survey crew who had simply refused to walk away from something worth protecting. Somewhere in the vast dark beyond the veil, the scattered remnants of the unmaking drifted on, leaderless and diminished, carrying with them the memory of a defeat they had not expected and could not yet fully comprehend, a reminder, perhaps, that whatever waited out there in the endless dark, humanity had not forgotten how to stand its ground. Not after 12,000 years. Not ever. And in the quiet corridors of the Dominion of Ash, beneath a wall bearing the names of the lost and the remembered, an ancient intelligence that had spent 12 millennia keeping a solitary, faithful watch finally allowed herself something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of a species fighting for survival against impossible odds. That hope had carried her through the long centuries of dormancy, patient and unyielding. This was something different, something quieter and in its own way far more powerful. The hope of someone who was no longer alone.